So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about PedVAE. PedVAE is a new event as of January 2019, just this year. How many of you are doing PedVAE? Okay, all right. And for those of you who aren't, maybe you will be after you learn about it. So what we're going to do here at the end of the day is review the history and the development of PedVAE, review the key terms and how you select daily minimum values. And that's very important because that's the foundation of meeting the definition. And if you aren't making those determinations accurately, you may be identifying PedVAEs by mistake or missing them. And then we will just take a look at the surveillance algorithm, and I'll give you a little drive-by on the PedVAE calculator. So ventilated patients, as we know, are at high risk for complications, poor outcomes. They can get ventilator-associated pneumonia, sepsis, acute respiratory distress syndrome, pulmonary embolism, barotrauma, and pulmonary edema. And these complications can lead to longer duration on mechanical ventilation, increase their hospital or ICU stay, and also increase their risk for morbidity and mortality. In preterm neonates, we know that prolonged ventilation for respiratory therapy or respiratory distress syndrome can contribute to the development of chronic lung disease. And then prolonged ventilation in the extremely low birth weight infants is also associated with neurodevelopment delays. Not good things. So in 2012, which was even before adult VAE rolled out for NHSN, there was already a surveillance working group pulled together, composed of not just CDC folks, but folks outside of CDC who have an interest and specialty in neonatal and pediatrics, looking at whether the VAE algorithm, which had yet rolled out, would be an option for the pediatric and the neonatal population. And out of those initial meetings, it was determined that there was insufficient data to use a VAE-like definition in those younger populations. What did come out of that meeting, the initial meeting, was that pneumonia should be pulled as an in-plan event in neonatal locations. Now, someone came up to me afterwards and said, we're doing pneumonia in neonatal, is that wrong? It's not wrong. You can do anything off-plan that you choose to. It's just that we, at that point, moving forward, it was decided as of January 2014 that we didn't really, because of the difficulty in the imaging and the way neonates present, it wasn't thought that that definition was very going to give us good data that we would want folks to be benchmarking after. And then also out of that, as a result of that, that meant that the only place that PedVAE, which it became known as PedVAE, was available was in pediatric locations. So they needed, the group felt that they needed more information before they could move on to using a VAE-like definition in the pediatric and neonatal population. And eventually a publication was published in Critical Care Medicine, and it showed that if you use a pediatric VAE-like definition, there's detection of events that are defined by changes in FiO2 and mean airway pressure, or MAP, and these were associated with increase in length of stay and with mortality. So with that information, the group felt a little more comfortable. They decided to move ahead, develop a PedVAE protocol. We piloted the PedVAE protocol with some field testing with some individual NHSN users who volunteered to do so in 2017. And then the event became available in 2019 for use. So let's take a look at it. So you will find the PedVAE protocol on the acute care facility pages, long-term acute care, and the inpatient rehab facilities. And similar, it's right next to VAE, comes right after pneumonia. Similar to the pneumonia, when we did this little exercise here in where do you find pneumonia. When you find PedVAE, you'll notice that we do draw attention to the fact that PedVAE surveillance is available in plan for pediatric and neonatal locations. And we also want to communicate that you can still do PedVAP in plan in a pediatric location using the pneumonia definition. You can expand the ribbons on that page. The protocol, of course, you'll find under the protocol section. You'll find FAQs that are specific to pediatric VAE, and you'll also find access to the calculator. Now, the FAQs, there's 11 topics, and within those 11 topics, it ends up there's 13 questions. So with all of our protocols, I'd encourage you, if you don't already use them, which I'm sure you probably do, to take a look before you send a question to us. Take a look at those FAQs. Your question is probably a common question that we've answered by other users, and if it is, we tend to create an FAQ. We update these every year. So who's eligible for PedVAE? Ventilated patients, as I mentioned, in acute care hospitals, long-term care hospitals, and long-term acute care hospitals, and inpatient rehab facilities. The patient needs to be in a pediatric or a neonatal location where you can collect denominator data, patient day and vent days. And we would not want you to do ventilated adults who may be housed in a pediatric location would also be included in pediatric VAE surveillance. You wouldn't just do VAE surveillance in an adult in a pediatric location. So that's similar to VAE. If we have a child in an adult location, you still include them in the VAE surveillance. Patients that aren't eligible for PedVAE surveillance are those on extracorporeal life support or paracorporeal membrane oxygenation. And that's the key there, membrane oxygenation. We've gotten some questions. So does this mean that every patient that has a VAD is excluded? And that is false. If they are being oxygenated and they have a VAD, then they are excluded. That ineligibility period only applies while they are receiving that type of support. It's not for their whole stay in the hospital. And of course, we would exclude non-acute care locations, which don't think we have a whole lot of non-acute care locations in the pediatric and neonatal populations, but it's possible. If a patient is on the high frequency ventilation, air APRV, or VDR, volumetric diffuse respiration, they are included. These are not excluded scenarios. For adult VAE, of course, they're excluded if they're on high frequency, but that is not the case for PedVAE. And you would also include patients if they are receiving conventional modes of mechanical ventilation and any of these other therapies listed below. Okay, let's take a look at the algorithm. It's short and sweet. It is one tier. It does not have the 3 tiers like adult VAE has. It is a single tier. The patient has to be on the ventilator for at least 2 days. Then you're looking for a baseline period of stability or improvement, and that is immediately followed by a sustained period of worsening oxygenation. And if that is met, per the protocol's guidance, you have a PedVAE identified. So PedVAEs are determined by identification of deterioration in the respiratory status after that period of stability or improvement using 2 key parameters, FiO2 and mean airway pressure, or MAP. And that's why you can use the high-frequency ventilated, include the high-frequency ventilated patients, because we use the MAP, we don't use PEEP. FiO2 refers to fraction of oxygen in inspired gas, and the room air here is at 0.21 or 21%. FiO2 is a setting on the ventilator, and that's what you're using when you're determining your daily minimum values, and we're going to get to that. Mean airway pressure, in contrast, is mean average or average pressure exerted on the airway and lungs from the beginning of inspiration until the beginning of the next inspiration. So it's an inspiratory cycle, and it is a measured or calculated value. This is not a setting on the ventilator per se. It is calculated using PEEP, PIP, inspiratory time, and other parameters like flow or frequency. So MAP, for purposes of PedVAE surveillance, just want to remind you, we were having a conversation with earlier, that's an acronym for mean arterial pressure as well, but when we're talking about PedVAE, we're talking about mean airway pressure. So FiO2 and MAP, the FiO2 ventilator settings and then the MAP values are documented across the calendar day for the patients, and we use those to identify the daily minimum FiO2 and the daily minimum MAP, and that is then the values that are used to determine your stability and your worsening of oxygenation. The daily minimum FiO2 and the MAP values are going to be used, and you must use the 24-hour period when you're selecting the daily minimum. You don't. It's not a 24-hour period. I'm sorry. Use the calendar day. You're not able to just select your 24-hour period based on charting. You're using calendar day. FiO2 and MAP readings are normally located in the medical record, either in the documentation by the respiratory therapy. Maybe you're going to find them in the flow charts. Maybe you're going to find it on electronic documentation, actually spit out from the ventilator. But you will be using those values and the MAP value to choose your daily minimum FiO2 and MAP. And you will use all the settings on the ventilator and all the documented MAPs that are recorded across the calendar day while the patient is receiving an eligible mode of ventilation. So that would include if the patient's undergoing a weaning, as long as they are receiving support from the ventilator, you would use those values documented. And it would exclude FiO2 and MAP when the patient is on extracorporeal or the membrane oxygenation. So it's the only values you would be excluding. You'll take all of those documented values, and for the FiO2 determination, daily minimum FiO2, you're going to look for the lowest documented FiO2 setting that's been maintained for at least an hour. And in the protocol, we provide guidance on how you would determine your lowest value if your documentation occurs greater than an hour. Now, when we say greater than an hour during the calendar day, we're not prescribing or requiring that you document hour. We're just saying if you have documentation less than an hour, we are providing a standardized means for you to determine was that value maintained for greater than an hour. So if there's no setting across the calendar day that's been maintained for an hour, then you simply choose the lowest setting. So let's take a look at a couple examples. So remembering that you select the lowest value recorded for each calendar day that is maintained for greater than an hour. With this example, what would the daily minimum FiO2 be? Want me to go back there, take a look again? Getting a hodgepodge here. It's like watching a horse race, isn't it? Yeah. Or that little carnival game where you try to squirt the water in the bullseye and have the Okay, let's see what we have here. So the correct answer is B, and that is 0.75. You'll notice that the lowest value is at 3 a.m. and it's 0.70, but that's changed by 4 a.m. to an increase to 0.90. So while the lowest value is 0.70, it wasn't maintained for a greater than an hour. So it's 0.75, the next lowest value documented on that calendar day. Okay, how about when ventilation is initiated late in the calendar day? Remembering that if you don't have a value that's maintained for at least an hour, you just simply choose the lowest value. So for this one, we want to know what is the daily minimum FiO2 for Monday and Tuesday. Need me to go back? Okay. This is the beauty of Poll Everywhere. You can go back. And you can still answer. Okay. Let's see how the answers are coming in. Another horse race. All right. And the answer is C. So the majority of you answered that. On Monday, 0.70 is increased to 0.80 after 30 minutes after the patient was first placed on the ventilator. So we don't have a value that was maintained for greater than of 1 hour. So it is just simply the lowest value, 0.70. And just a reminder that when you're doing your determination of your daily minimum values, you're looking specifically at each calendar day individually. You're not going to look across to the next calendar day to see if it was maintained into that. You're only looking at each calendar day individually to determine the lowest value. And then on Tuesday, our lowest value is 0.75. It was that at 6 o'clock. 9 o'clock, it was still at 0.75, so that's definitely greater than an hour. So you can choose that one as your daily minimum for Tuesday. Okay, when we're doing our daily minimum MAP value, it is just the lowest value of the day, regardless of how long the value is maintained. So additionally, another little piece of determining daily minimum MAP is that we know that you can sometimes find values that are out to the decimal place. And when that's the case, you're going to round up using this guidance. So 0.00 to 0.49 rounds down, and 0.50 to 0.99 rounds up. Let's look at a couple examples. But before we do that, I also want to point out that when we're doing daily minimum MAP, if the patient is less than 30 days of age, MAP values between 0 and 8 are considered to be equal to 8. And when the patient reaches 30 days of age and then older, MAP values 0 to 10 are supposed to be or are to be considered equal to 10. So with that, let's take a look at and identify the daily minimum MAP for a patient that is less than 30 days. And these are the MAP values that you found in the chart. Okay, and here's your options: 5, 6, 8, or 10. And coming around the corner, the 8's in a minute. And, whoops, sorry. The answer is 8. Let's look at that. So remembering that the patient less than 30 days values between 0 and 8 are equal to 8. So in this case, the lowest value is 5, but that would be interpreted to be an 8. So the daily minimum MAP for Monday is 8. Okay, let's look at this one. Now this is a patient that's greater than or equal to 30 days. Keeping in mind that in that case, 0 to 10 values, and so now you have a hint of what you're supposed to pick for this one. And here are your options. Oh, there goes the peer pressure. Oh, wait, everybody didn't pick that. Okay, and the answer is D. Again, remembering that you're going to interpret values between 0 and 10 as 10. So in this case, the daily minimum for Monday is 5. The lowest value is 5, but because the patient is greater than or equal to 30 days, the value would be 10. Okay. And this one, you're not going to select. I'm just going to tell you. Because we need to round up and down, our options are 12, 13. So what's the lowest value? 12. Okay. Tough one, right? All right. Okay, so here's a snapshot of the algorithm out of the protocol itself. I want to remind you that this is an algorithm for surveillance only. You know, it's supposed to be managing your patients based on whether or not they'll meet a PedVAE definition. So just because maybe the FiO2 is cranked up, you don't want to turn it down so that you don't get a PedVAE. And I'm sorry that I have to say that, but we've heard rumor of that in the VAE world, adult VAE world. So what you need is the baseline period of stability improvement on the ventilator. It has to be maintained for greater than or equal to 2 days. And immediately following that baseline, you need to have an increase in whichever parameter the baseline is set in. The increase for evidence of worsening of oxygenation must occur in that same parameter. And then it must meet the requirements outlined here. In FiO2, the increase has to be greater than or equal to 0.25% or a jump 25 points. In the MAP value, if your baseline is in the MAP value, then your increase has to be equal to greater than or equal to 4 centimeters of water. So the patient has to be ventilated 2 days. However, that baseline period can be established in those first 2 days that they're on the ventilator. After they've been ventilated for 2 days, then you need 2 days of worsening oxygenation. So the earliest a patient can meet a PedVAE definition is after 4 days of ventilation. They have to have been ventilated at least for 4 days. And the earliest date of event would be day 3. When we're talking about the baseline period of stability improvement that's followed by the increase, it's a greater than or equal to 0.25 increase, and it has to be sustained for 2 days. And in MAP, it's a 4 centimeter, greater than or equal to 4 centimeter increase, and that has to be sustained. Just a restatement of the algorithm, said a different way, which I'm not going to read to you, but I'm just trying to reinforce the algorithm. Again, wanting to point out that it's the first, when you're looking for that increase, look at the increase relative to the first day of the baseline. And this is important because if you don't have an increase to the first day of the baseline, you know that the baseline, because it has to be either stability, that baseline is either going to be the same number, or the second day it's going to be a lesser number. And so if you've met the increase over the first day, you know that you've met it over the second day. And it has to be an increase relative to both days of the baseline. So let's look at an example. Again, we have to specify the age. So in this case, the patient is less than 30 days. So MAP values of 0 to 8 are equal to 8. So in the when we're looking for a baseline period, we see that we have a baseline established in both the daily minimum MAP parameter and the daily minimum FiO2 parameter. Following that baseline period in both parameters, in daily minimum MAP, we do meet the PedVAE definition. The values were 7, but they convert to 8s. We have an increase that is greater than or equal to 4. And so we meet the PedVAE definition. PedVAC is met. You have identification and the date of event, which we're getting to that key term here in a bit, but the date of event would be event day 4. We don't have a PedVAC if this patient was greater than or equal to 30 days, because values of less than 0 to 10 are equated to be 10. So we do have a baseline period of 10, but the increase is only 2 centimeters over the baseline. So we do not meet the definition if this patient happens to be greater than or equal to 30 days. In this case, we do. So when the values are 10, the increase must be at least, if the values are between 0 and 10, the increase over that, whatever those numbers are, they can be 3, 4, 5, 6. The increase has to be at least 14 so that you get the 4 centimeter increase. Now we didn't meet the, we had a baseline in the FiO2 parameter, but we do not meet a PedVAC definition in that parameter because there is not a greater than 0.25 increase or 25% increase. It was not sustained. So you can see we have a baseline on days 2 and 3. On day 4, it does jump up to 25, but it's not sustained. It bumps back down to 50. So we do not meet the PedVAC definition. And I'm providing you examples here where you had baseline in the same parameter. I want to emphasize that to meet a PedVAE definition, you don't have to meet it in both parameters. It's either or. So you don't have to see if you have PedVAE in the MAP and then you find out you don't meet PedVAE in the FiO2. So you go, oh, I don't have one. But no, that's not true. It's only one parameter or the other. And here is an example of, we have an increase of what I was talking about. You want to make sure your increase, your worsening oxygenation, is relative to that first day of the baseline period. You can see that 10 is to 14 is a jump of 4. But your first day of your baseline period was 12. So we do not meet the PedVAE definition for that reason. And that's what I was referring to, why you want to look at your increase relative to the first day of the baseline period. Okay, so as I already alluded to earlier, the date of event is the first day of worsening oxygenation. So it's the onset of worsening oxygenation. Day 1 of the required greater than or equal to 2-day period of worsening oxygenation. And the earliest, again, that the event date can be is day 3. And you need to have that patient, while they have to be ventilated at least 2 days to qualify to be included in PedVAE surveillance, in order for you to even meet a PedVAE definition, they have to have been on the ventilator for at least 4 days. So if you have a kid on the ventilator and off in 3 days, well, really don't waste your time trying to determine daily minimum values on them. There's no way they could have met a PedVAE definition. The date of event defines the period during which the antimicrobial and the pathogen questions that are a part of reporting, but it's an optional part, refer to, and it also sets the 14-day PedVAE event period. So similar to our other events, you have a 14-day grace period where you do not report a second event identified in that 14 days. Day one is the date of event is day one, and then 14 days forward gives you your 14-day VAE event period, PedVAE event period. There is a reporting exception related to date of event. If your date of event, which would be the date of onset of worsening oxygenation, is on or after the date of documentation of evidence of consent and the patient is being supported just for organ donation purposes, you would not be required to report that event as an identified PedVAE. Okay. All right, so here we have back to our example, just to point out that our date of event is the date of the first day of worsening oxygenation, day 4 in this example. Now I want to just spend some time on the PedVAE collection form and the application. You really only are required to report this information that is outlined with the red box. Grab a drink here. I have to wet my whistle. All right, so this is the required information. Location of mechanical ventilation initiation, the date that the mechanical ventilator was instituted. If the patient is a NICU patient, you need the birth weight and the gestational age, and then the parameter in which the event was met. There is other optional data to report, and we encourage you to report this. PedVAE is only one tier, and the reason being that we just did not feel like we had enough information to proceed with an IVAC or a PVAP tier. We may or may not ever add an IVAC or a PVAP tier, but we would like to collect some more information since this is a new surveillance measure to help us reach that decision. So if you are reporting PedVAE, while these fields are optional, we encourage you to report them because it will help us to make determinations as we gather more data. Now, how you fill out that PedVAE, specifically those optional fields, you can find that information in this, and we've talked about this with several events. We've referred you to the table of instructions. And you can see that this particular table of instructions is 5 pages long, so there's a lot of really good information in there. So I'd take a look at that when you have questions about what are they really asking for in these fields? What do they want? What does this mean? So on the optional fields, we have several questions that in the application will expand depending on your answer. So if you answer yes, if you look back, you cannot answer they're grayed out. It's a little hard to tell, but the ventilator-associated pneumonia, atelectasis, those conditions are grayed out. If you answer yes, they open up and you're able to answer as many as you want. Whoops. And I want to point out that that other field, we want as much as you can tell us about the other. It does have a limitation of 200 characters, but hopefully you can, abbreviate and get as much as you want in there. When you answer the antimicrobial field, similarly, it pops open. You'll see that under the antimicrobial agent on this, it's nothing there. If you say yes, the fields expand and you're able to enter 3 drugs with the instruction that you're looking at administration on the 2 days before or the 2 days after or the date of event itself. Otherwise, if there were no drugs and microbial agents administered that are found in the appendix, you would just check no. You can enter an administration start date as far as a year back. And we know that, some kids stay in the NICU for a long period of time. They may have had an antibiotic started a while back. So we wanted to allow you to enter whatever the true date was. Okay. As far as pathogens, again, there is specific information on when that pathogen would be identified from a culture, and also whether or not you select yes or no to the pathogen. So I just encourage you to take a really good look at the table of instructions, and I also would encourage you to report the optional data if you are planning on doing PedVAE surveillance. When we look at the denominator data, what's required to report is patient days and ventilator days. If you're doing PedVAE in a NICU location, you are required to report your ventilator days and patient days using the birth weight breakdown, which you're all familiar with in NICU for CLABSI. And then if you choose to, you can also report your ventilator and patient days using gestational age breakdowns. And then the third denominator that's optional for reporting would be episodes of mechanical ventilation. When you're looking at your monthly reporting plan, just want to point out, and it's not maybe as obvious here, but in your pediatric location, you can select PedVAP or PedVAE in plan. You will see that VAE is grayed out. You would not be able to select that in the application. And once you have selected it in this pediatric location, when you go to fill in your monthly summary data, you'll note that the asterisks, total patient days and ventilator days, those are the required. And then the other field, the episode of mechanical ventilation in this location, is optional. When we look at a NICU location, you'll see that you cannot select PedVAP. It's not available in plan, and likewise, you cannot select VAE. And when you're reporting your summary data, you will be required to report the patient days and the ventilator days, again, broken down by the birth weight categories. And if you choose to report the gestational age breakdown, again, it's patient days, vent days, and your episodes of mechanical ventilation are also optional. Just a better screenshot, bigger. A little bit about the PedVAE calculator. You'll find access to this under the calculator ribbon on the PedVAE webpage, or on the left nav bar underneath the VAE calculator. Encourage you to read the instructions. It's always good to read the instructions. It's always good to expand that more. Might give you some hints. Excuse me. You'll be entering your mechanical ventilation date, the start date. Currently, I'm going to tell you a little bit about an upgrade to the VAE calculator already. And you'll be asked whether the patient is less than 30 days. When you'll note that if you enter a value that is less than 8, the calculator will convert the value to 8. Likewise, if the patient was greater than 30 days, if you entered a value into the calculator that was less than 10, it would convert to 10. Okay. Now, most recently, has anybody come across this yet? Not a whole lot of people doing PedVAE yet, but most recently we have determined that we overlooked something. So there's going to be an upgrade to the PedVAE calculator soon, probably by the end of April. What we determined, and actually someone asked a really good question, so your questions do feed improvements. So we want to make sure you understand that, and we appreciate that. What we determined that is if a patient crosses over from less than 30 days to 30 days, now their values 0 to 8 now are interpreted as 0 to 10, and that could potentially give you either identify a PedVAE when it shouldn't have been, or misidentifying a PedVAE. So we have placed this warning box in the calculator to just make you aware of that. And we will be improving the calculator so that you won't have to be aware of it yourself. The calculator will be aware of it. So here's the example. The patient it was answered yes, the patient is less than 30 days. And on 12/31, the patient turned 30 days. And now that value of 8 is converted to 10. So there's no longer a baseline period, and therefore the PedVAE definition is not met. So just a little reminder, if you're using the calculator now, we will be adjusting that to ask a couple of other additional fields. We'll ask, is the patient less than 30 days on the date of mechanical ventilation initiation? And if the answer to that is yes, then there'll be a second field that will ask you the day of life of the patient on the date of mechanical ventilation. And then when you go to the next screen, you'll have a day of life column, and the calculator will adjust the values 0 to 10 once the patient hits day of life 30. And that's it. And I'm happy to take any questions.
If tracking of FiO2 was at random times, how would you determine the lowest value? So, for example, at 10 a.m., FiO2 is 0.75. At 11:30 a.m., FiO2 is 0.80. At 12 p.m., FiO2 is 0.80. And then at 12:30 p.m., FiO2 is 0.80.
Okay, so I think the first value was at
0.75.
0.75, and that was at 10 o'clock. And then the next value recorded was at 11:30. So if you look at our guidance, you need to have duplicate values. If it's 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock, you'd need that to be 0.75, 0.75. But from 10 o'clock until 11:30, you've already met the greater than an hour. The patient was maintained at 0.75 from 10 a.m. until 11:30. You've met greater than an hour just by virtue of documentation occurring an hour and a half apart.
Okay, next question. Are level 3 NICUs required to report VAE in NHSN?
Again, we don't require. The only requirement that you have for any NHSN event is if you select it in your monthly reporting plan. And then, yes, you are required for that location to report any events that are identified.
Okay, and the last question from the web is, what do you suggest is the easiest way to collect FiO2 and MAP daily? We're having difficulty here, and it is extremely time consuming.
I would suggest that you work with your respiratory therapists. This is also a concern we had when we started with VAE. Many of the hospitals found that you can collaborate with your respiratory therapists. Likely they have a means of collecting that data much more simply than you going to the chart and picking it out day after day after day. So I'd work with your colleagues on collecting, coming up with a means of collecting, and perhaps they'll even collect the data for you and just send you a report. Is that it? All right, thanks.